The program is State Affairs. Mr. Beulah Adeoye, it's good to have you on State Affairs.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You know, going through your profile, one cannot help but to be excited. You graduated with first class from the Faculty of Law, University of Ibadan. You have worked as a partner at Deloitte. So some of us are wondering, you're still a young man. So why did you resign from Deloitte recently?
Thank you very much, Edmund. For me, it was important that I serve my people when I have the energy to do so with the level of intensity, intentionality, and purposefulness as I did serve in the companies and the international organizations I did. Having worked in professional services and having put a lot of time into working with government in the public sector and the private sector, etc., it became obvious to me that focusing on our development, on our growth, on our industrialization cannot, as a matter of necessity, be part-time. So yes, being at Deloitte as a partner is not only fulfilling and financially rewarding, because that's the height of your career in the #1 professional services firm in the world. And for many years, it was the #1 commercial brand in the world. Having been there for several years at the height, it's important for us to set the agenda for the development of our people and put behind it the same intentionality, the same intensity, whatever it will take us, rallying together the resources we have and intentionally make walk the talk. It's not when you're retired or you're done and then you have no energies. What would you give? I look at Singapore and the mileage they've made over time. Why can't Oyo State? Why can't we be the Singapore of Nigeria, of Africa? The people who developed those places were intentional. They spent time, strategized, and then had enough energy to implement, to execute, to see to fruition, and set the plan and the vision for the future, which is still. So I don't think it's a sacrifice too large for me to, step away from the comfort and the poshness of being a partner in a multinational and leading multinational teams to then focus on our people. Because in my view, being where we are, we must start making mileage to being world class. If you're not world class, you're probably no class.
You've talked about energy and you've talked about serving the people. When you say serving the people, do you want to put food on their table? Do you want to go into their houses and sweep it clean? What do you mean by serving the people?
Okay, thank you very much. What I learned in rising quickly through professional services and through a career is that one day you're the intern, you're the analyst, you're the contract staff, you're the follower. Another day you're the leader, making the decision, visioning, setting the strategy and the agenda, and being responsible for execution. What I've found is that to some extent I've been a follower, and I'm an ordinary citizen. Service to humanity, and for me, service to God and service to the people must be the highest order of attainment or achievement. That's for me. And when you're planted in a corner of the world, the Almighty did not make a mistake planting you there. I reflect on my life, retired from a partnership at 41, 1 year too late, I would say. The idea is that I've served myself. I've been able to make my family comfortable. What I'll eat and drink and enjoy is pretty much set, and I found that that's very little. What can we do together to start making mileage as a people for those people who will never have the opportunities and privileges and blessings that I have? I think it is time for us, for me, to focus on that and to start walking that talk.
At 41, you are obviously thinking of political power, right?
One of the ways to serve your people is through the instrumentality of governance. In our own setup in Africa, governance formally is set in the sphere of politics. To that extent, it will be a yes. I've been involved in philanthropic pursuits for quite a while, and there's only so much you can do. It's what you're doing is a complement to what the government is doing, but that instrumentality to serve the most people for their good for the longest tenure and to make the most lasting impact, in my own observation, is government. To that extent, getting involved in governance in government, you can say in politics, will then be, yes, an option.
Mr. Adeoye, you are a core professional, a forensic expert, a core professional moving to the political scene. What difference would that make? Are you a redefiner of politics?
That's an interesting question you ask. If the instrumentality for service for the most people, for the most good, is politics, then the tools and instruments for you to get your work done is something that we kit ourselves up in professional services. So for instance, when I joined the firm, the first firm I joined, you went to training school. And till I left the firm, I used to be part of what's called the Deloitte University, largely in Europe, training people going into leadership. There's a way you tool yourself and equip yourself for the journey so that we can ask and extract value. So yes, I will say, to some extent, there's similarities between the professional services and being a professional and a technical person and maybe governance and politics, because you need to be tooled. It's the difference in what tools are in your toolbox. That's where the radical difference lies. So for instance, to become a chartered accountant, you go to ATS, then you write professional exams, you attend classes, then you go into the evaluation sessions, and then you're coming with a certificate. For you to represent in governance in Nigeria today, there are certain instrumentalities that you must associate with or begin associating with. So for instance, for political office in Nigeria, it has to be a political party. So those are the learnings and those are the things that you then have to begin to do to get involved, to then tool yourself and equip yourself for the task ahead.
You've worked with different governments. You have worked for different states. You know how governments operate. As a forensic expert, you have seen the bits and pieces. As you are now coming in, from your experience as a forensic expert, what are the tools in your box to use politics for development?
Okay. So the first thing which I find is that there should necessarily be a social contract between the occupier of an office for public good and the beneficiaries of the public good. If you work in any established organization, you will have an employment contract. You have some agreements for services or of services and how that should run. In my experience, there is a disconnect between the beneficiaries and the players to deliver the service. So what I learned from doing forensic investigations, for instance, is that what should have been in the public purse for the benefit of the people ended up in private hands for their own private needs and wants, or their fantasies, for instance. And without going into much detail for that, the first thing is the governance and accountability for what are we agreeing to do? Why are you there? And then the monitoring of that to ensure that service is delivered. There's no way you sign an engagement letter, for instance, with a professional services firm or an auditor, for instance, for them to audit your books, and then they start auditing their family books. What would you report at the end of the day as your deliverable? That disconnect is really where I feel from my experience. So why are we talking to Mr. X or Mrs. Y about this? It's totally a disconnect between the objectives and the reality, and I would hope that we can reestablish that social contract. We're doing that already through the philanthropic organizations and what we're doing, for instance, at the Beulah Adeoye Foundation. They've not asked us to do that. Of our own free will and good spirit, together with the teeming scores of people that work for us, over several years, tens of thousands of people have benefited from what we've done. We've seen the direct impact of that. Imagine the exponential growth. Imagine the impact you could make in the real world, where the resources of state are available to then focus it on the things that makes real differences in the lives of people, to make their lives better.
Like
healthcare, things like infrastructure. There's still a massive infrastructural deficit that we have. I take, for instance, Oyo State, where I come from, and I've lived most of my life in Ibadan. I was born here, University College Hospital there in Orita Mefa. I attended Orita Mefa Baptist Northern Primary School, went to ISI and UI, went to UI. My businesses are here, my family's here, my houses and everything's here. But I am also originally from a part of Oyo State called Ipakpo in the Tesiwaju local government. And from your drive from Ibadan there, and if you look at the map of Oyo State, there is arable land, apart from other resources for the development of our people. Imagine that we had something like a circular rail. I tried it on the map, spoke to certain professionals. You could link 29 different local governments with that. And setting up one factory, just starting with one, costing less than $1 million or $1 million. That's about $29 million for each local government. And then in the daytime, it is for movement and for the businesses. At night, the production from those factories sit on flat beds on those rails and take them all the way to Akinyele local government, where we have the current train station, straight to the port, export, without making noise, without too much. You'd have created work, you'd have created opportunities from the cleaner to the shop floor to admin to facilities to builders. What you could do by just focusing on the development of our people. Imagine the power and the strength that could create. So in my mind, what we've done, even with our philanthropy, and this I'm mentioned to you has been done with my own resources, shows us that there's so much that we can do. can only be expanded if we have the instrumentality and the resources of state to deliver.
In the course of this interview, you've talked about making your state a first-class economy. You've talked about Singapore. Why Singapore?
When you look at the uniqueness of Singapore within the Malaysian construct and where they're coming from and what they've achieved, Singapore is a country that's not blessed with the resources that even their neighbors, Malaysia, has. They don't have the oil. And how did they make a journey from being a disadvantaged, almost expunged country from the Malaysian construct to be one of the Asian tigers? It was because there were certain truths they told themselves. First of all, in Singapore, they decided that corruption will not have a place in governance and in government. If you will not serve the common good of the people, you have no place. And corruption thrives in lack of transparency. Where there's no transparency or accountability, then a lot of things happen. But what did they do? They looked at themselves. Now, when you consider how much refining they do without a drop of oil in their own natural resources, at the time where they made the mileage, several decades later, they've created something for themselves. So I'm looking at us as, or your state, for instance, not necessarily being blessed with oil, for instance, which is a mainstay still now of the Nigerian economy, but having so many other opportunities where if we harnessed it and we used our best resources thinking to then find where we can have the comparative advantage, what we can start to do today, not something esoteric, what we can start doing today to make our lot better, then we can make that mileage. In the world today, food is still important. People are saying, oh, there's hunger in the land. How can there be hunger in the land? We have, this is grass here. Just dig the ground, put a cob of corn, put a seed of corn, you see it grow. So when you have something in your hands to do and you don't do it, who are you to blame? I believe the history, our future will be written by us thinking, visioning, okay, but beyond that visioning, executing it intentionally with as much doggedness as you would put in any of the businesses that you do for yourself. It's not, we cannot have the worst of us lead the most of us while the best of us are sitting somewhere we're complaining. No, I think we need to take our fate into our hands and be serious about our development, be serious about our growth.
In the case of Singapore, we cannot run away from the visionary leadership of Lee Kuan Yew. So what role does visionary leadership play in the development of society?
Okay. The Lee Kuan Yew has now become an icon globally in terms of moving from being third world to being first world. And the visionary must have a bug biting them, almost a restlessness, almost a sometimes it's out of this world, as it were, seeing where the people could be, and at a lot of personal discomfort, personal sacrifice, determined to take the people from where they are to where they should be. And it's not leading from the rear or from a commentary box or from an armchair. You lead from the front. You lead the charge. There's no guarantee that you will ultimately be the one to be there at that time, but that doesn't stop the visionary. So the vision, for instance, of a Singapore where other people will comment about them, learn from them. I remember as a child, my dad went for this international leadership. That was in 1988 in Singapore. So as far back as 1988, leadership development was already the story for the world. It was, I believe, the Agai Institute then, doing leadership trainings, and the venue was Singapore, because that's where you can actually see the mileage they were making. We've been on our journey. We might have lost our way. The visionary must be able to stay the course. Sometimes the people you're leading and creating a strategy for and leading and visioning do not understand the journey you're on. That's where being dogged, being determined, and not caring for yourself personally, those sacrifices have to be made, because it's in retrospect that they would appreciate this was the direction and we're in a better place.
I know you like Awolowo, right?
Absolutely.
Why do you like Awolowo?
I think Awolowo was a visionary in the mold of not many people in the world. The things he saw, the vision that he foresaw for Nigeria, and some documented, and the battles he had in his life was to see us get to a certain place in Africa, in the world, and even for ourselves in Nigeria. At the time they led in the Western region, let me use an example that still stands today. Think of the Odua group. There were certain people that set up and said, you know what, while it was the Western region, Western Nigeria, there were certain investments that were made. There were strategic actions taking into the future. Think of free and compulsory education. When you educate a child and you open the mind, whatever you do with that child, you can't quite bring it back to the previous state. These were people who did these things for the generality of the people. And for someone like an Awolowo, people now mold their policies, their politics in the mold of an Awo, because he was a real visionary. I've studied quite some of his work and some of the writings, original writings that he had, and it's even against the tide of the time. It took time to document that this is where we are going, this is where we should go. Some were implemented without the real spirit of it. So think of the African Union, for instance, and the Organization of African Union, for instance. The thinking at that time, once it becomes political, purely political, for instance, you lose some of the fervor that is inbuilt into that construct. But leaders of that nature, we need to encourage people to be built on that model and then move us forward, because you need thinkers. It's the thinkers of our time that would shape the future for us. The thinkers in science, the thinkers in industry, the thinkers in finance, the thinkers, the visionaries, who then stay the course to see. It's not like you won't make mistakes, you will make mistakes, but that visioning is important. The direction, the set direction, where it goes, and then staying the course, I think is important.
So should I say that you are inspired by the ideals of Awolowo?
Absolutely, yes.
You know Seyi Makinde, right?
I do.
He's the governor of Oyo State.
Absolutely.
I know you know him well.
I know Seyi Makinde. Seyi Makinde is my mentor. Seyi Makinde is a friend. Seyi Makinde is someone that I've interacted with at in very close quarters.
He inspires you.
Absolutely. Let me tell you, when I took an active interest in the government of Oyo State was when Seyi Makinde came in. And in such a short period of time, the kind of changes I was seeing was not in the mold of the politics we've had before. To my mind, in the recent times, the best governor by far in Oyo State is Seyi Makinde, undoubtedly, hands down. Are you talking about education? Look at, I just mentioned Awo and the free and compulsory education that he brought, which was for which there were many beneficiaries. A mere 3,000 naira had deprived many children from going to school. Upon coming into office, he removed it. Do you know how many out of school children were then returned to school? Because if our people are not educated, that's when they can be instruments for destruction of their own future. That's one. Think about healthcare. I've mentioned healthcare as well. Of the 351 primary healthcare centers, over 300 renovated to international standards. Let me tell you something you might not be aware of. There was funding in the state for the construction of something in water resources. By the time this government came in, they not only finished the project, they made massive savings, tens of millions of dollars that was returned to the World Bank or whatever bank that was. And I was asking my question, really? You mean there is a government in today, in the corruption and rot we have, they'll find use for it? They would have found a variation of contract. No. Prudent spending, not for personal gratification, but for the benefit of the people. And I dare say, from my own going around town, people love this person. Leaving the politics aside, someone I've sat with who's had profound, heartfelt love for the people. He got a second term. And there's things he's trying to put in place. Involvement with him in government has inspired me to say, we can't sit and complain. This is someone who's a titan in energy and resources. I know that from doing work in the oil and gas sector. I used to be the Africa leader at Deloitte Risk Advisory for oil and gas. I led that for several years. Someone who's made billions of dollars in energy and resources, why would he come to sit in Oyo State where the entire resources of Oyo State over even the next 8 years is a fraction of what is made personally in government? It must be service at a certain level.
Seyi Makinde is that rich?
I would not have the detail of his current financial status. I can imagine that not focusing on his business and focusing on Oyo State will probably be at his personal detriment. I can say that authoritatively. But that was a wealthy person, by all means a multi-billionaire, who's come to then serve his people. And sitting across him all times of day and night, listening to how he's dealing with Oyo State matters, many times I've been inspired, I must say.
Does he know that you are interested in political power?
I believe that in our conversations, we've had heart-to-heart conversations about the motivations he's had about governance and about the government of Oyo State. And we've had conversations around what legacy to be left and how we can support in sustaining that legacy. It's not about you as an individual. I think part of the challenges we've had before is that we build strong individuals, not strong institutions. I believe a leader is not exactly as successful if their successor is not more successful than they are. Because the point is that the leadership and visioning means you've seen your tenure and then you've also made plans for the future. We've had conversations around what his legacy is and how that's being pursued. We've had conversations around his passion to bring people of like minds into government. I'm sure from those conversations, there would be, he's aware that I'll be interested in, because I've been doing that already, serving in Oyo State. We served in Oyo State. I was the lead client service partner for Oyo State at Deloitte. I was the one that opened and presented Deloitte to Oyo State to the world at the International Business Summit in 2023. So
in London?
In London, yes. That held at the Royal Gloucester Hotel. So working with the team with the Oyo State team and then the Deloitte team, we facilitated that, and I played a major role in that. So clearly he's aware that I'm interested and working with government and governance.
You know, I've always believed that Oyo State is capable of lifting Africa out of poverty. That Oyo State can be that pace setter in developmental politics. So when I see young, brilliant men like you wanting to say, let's test the waters, I am encouraged. What inspires you?
I think we're on the same page in terms of inspiration. When I say Oyo State could be the Singapore of Nigeria and the Singapore of Africa, it's a firm belief that from where we are, we could be that state, that sub-sovereign that can raise its people first from poverty, which is needless poverty, to not only create wealth for its own citizens, but it also creates enough resources to then start its own developmental journey. The first thing is that people must feed today. They must be alive today. Their basic requirements: food, clothing, shelter, security, healthcare, and then the surplus of that is then what filters out. People then believe there's something happening here. Because something is happening here, people come in, and then that wealth can then be channeled into investments into the future. So yes, I absolutely firmly believe, and that's my motivation, that if we're going to be to get on our developmental journey, our industrialization journey. Now, the point about the factories that I made earlier is that the adjacencies from that will create an ecosystem of growth, of development. It flows into the society, flows into the community. When that happens and it is replicated across, take Singapore, moving from about $300 per capita income to $60,000 in a few short years. 60,000. That is a story that visioning, staying the course, execution. The power of execution is also important, and this is not about being partisan at all. This is not about political ideology. This is about a focus on our development. What is it that is paining us? I believe that's my motivation to get involved.
I am watching you. I'm following your politics. When next I find you, I'll be talking about your political party. You have talked about a social contract. I want to see what you are drawing up. You've talked about service to humanity. We will test it. You have talked about education as a tool for mental uplifting. You'll give us the details. So for now, Mr. Beulah Adeoye, I'm watching you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Edmond.
And thank you for featuring on State Affairs.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine.